Let nobody stop us. I close by quoting once more the man that the young lady quoted, that magnificent black bard who has now passed on, Langston Hughes.
What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? These are the lines of Langston Hughes' 1951 poem, Harlem, a poem arguably about the neglect of and divestment in Black Americans across the history of their time in the United States. That last line, or does it explode, can possibly be read as a response to this neglect, this anger, this hurt. After all, as Martin Luther King Jr. once said, the riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Black poor has worsened over the last 12 or 15 years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. Harlem is arguably a poem by a Black person for a Black person, a way to challenge our situations, to question the systems that hunt us, to ask what becomes of a dream deferred. In part 1 of this video series, we looked at the co-opting of wokeness by conservatives and how it pointed to a larger historical problem of white fear and white anger. Despite Harlem being for and by Black people, I see vestiges of its sentiment in the war on woke, in angry white men who feel victimized by a deadly concoction of a dream deferred and an uncertain progression into the future. Burned by the failed promise of the American dream, terrified of failing in legacies their forefathers thrived in, and angry that they're losing a place in the world that they view as rightfully theirs. Angry white men give into their budding vulnerability. This video looks at what comes next. After the fear, after the seed of anger is planted, after the angry white and white-minded people of America begin asking questions, like who is their savior? Are they truly as alone as they feel? And who has to pay for the erosion of their promises? What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Hello and welcome to the Shapiro podcast, where I'm the only one speaking for a bunch of other people, just like our founding fathers intended. I am your host, Shapiro. Say hello, Sprayer.
Hello.
If you're a new alpha viewer, we here at the Shapiro podcast always keep a registered spray bottle expert on hand to keep us in line. Every time I say something a little too unfair, my sprayer will spray me violently. Let's demonstrate for everyone watching at home. Sprayer, why don't you give me a little spritz? Perfect. God damn. So there's been a recent debate on Twitter, not that I would know, of course. I got permanently banned for life after committing a hate crime there, about the effectiveness of leftist content creators who attempt to de-radicalize young men from far-right politics. And in this debate, there was a lot of leftists don't do enough here, and
right-wing talking heads are more compassionate
there, and yada yada yada, I need a lobotomy. But I think this debate is important. In fact, the central question at the heart of it explains one of the many ways conservative medias like Fox News melt your brain. The question of, are leftists doing enough? Are they compassionate enough to de-radicalize the far right? Is pointless, because it, one, misunderstands how and why a person is absorbed into far-right communities in the first place, and two, it misunderstands just what compassion is, what listening is, and who is actually doing it. So if you watched part 1 of this video series, you will be familiar with Michael Kimmel, author of the woke liberal leftist luncheon book, Angry White Men. To better explain the thesis of this video, I want you to imagine just for a moment that you are one of the angry men or boys described in Kimmel's book. You're feeling duped, misunderstood, unheard, and rejected, which is antithetical to your feelings of entitlement. You feel as if you should be the most protected, most awarded, most advantaged person in the United States, if not the world, and yet life is not paying off for you in the way American history promised. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe you're struggling under the weight of money, or you were denied college admissions, or you tried connecting with a woman and she turned you down. Maybe you feel that your peers don't accept you and you feel left out. There is a deep hurt within you, one that has been building for years and is becoming self-immolating. And at the root of it, these feelings are valid. Not wanting to be manipulated by politics, not wanting to be ignored or left out by your peers, not wanting to worry about jobs or money. These are all normal, almost unavoidable desires of the human experience. When a sense of superiority or entitlement are introduced into the mix, how do these feelings transform? And how would you, the angry American, nurse these feelings? Would you go to someone who challenges your biases, even if they are compassionate in doing so? Would you go to a place that you've already decided is determined to misunderstand you, simply because they seek to understand others too? Would you go to the evil, woke, liberal, leftist, feminist, postmodern Coca-Cola left? And even if you did go to these places, would you do it with an open heart? Would you be committed to questioning the source of this pain, even if it dismantles your quest for sustained bias? In truth, there are a lot of people who do all of the above, people who feel hopeless yet find community in helping others, knowing that doing so will inevitably help themselves too. But there is another sector of people who initially or permanently go somewhere that only confirms these feelings of entitlement and superiority. Among the discourse of whether or not the right is better at accepting people with aggrieved entitlement, I saw a Twitter user say that the left tells you that you're privileged and that you need to help dismantle systems, while the right accepts you for who you are. And this was said in a way that favored right-wing politics, by the way. The idea that left-wing politics expect too much out of its base, which is in many ways its own conversation, I have my own thoughts about it, is interesting compared to how little, quote-unquote, is expected from far-right politics. We've got it in our head that because right-wing politicians accept their base, flaws and all, somehow that makes left-wing politics unwelcoming, discriminatory, and unequipped to help de-radicalize. And in thinking so, we fail to consider how possessive investment and supremacy plays a role in far-right radicalization. Some people join these movements or feel ostracized from more progressive movements because they don't like the idea of dismantling systems of power that they benefit from, or they don't like being told that they're a part of certain systems that discriminate. Especially if they already feel powerless, they're going to cling to whatever power they can, even if that power encroaches on the rights of other people. I think this discourse also misunderstands what it means to accept someone in the political realm. How not challenging aggrieved entitlement is done not out of compassion, but for pundit gain. We here at the Shapiro podcast are committed to gaining absolutely everything we can from you, down to your socks. We love pilfering. We love scamming, exploiting, conning. Whatever you have, I want it in the bag by the end of this episode, and I'm going to look you in the face and make you think I'm doing it for your own good. And there are many, many more experts and talking heads who are just like us.
Because we're a big, happy family.
We don't care about you. We care about your socks. Right.
Put them in the bag.
So back to imagining yourself as the angry American described in Michael Kimmel's book. Armed with your entitlement and rock-hard biases, you stumble across the content of someone who looks like you, or thinks like you, or carries that same hurt as yours on their face. Maybe they're really good at debating people you don't like. Maybe they say exactly what you're thinking, and they don't hide behind fear the way you might. In your eyes, they're heroes. In fact, they're saviors. And so you begin consuming more of their content. And they have friends or colleagues who share those same views, so you watch their stuff too. And before you know it, you're deep into a pipeline, regurgitating so-called facts about reverse racism and reverse sexism, and you chuckle along whenever a Fox News anchor makes a transphobic joke. At once, an act that could have been healthy, finding hobbies, exploring your hurt, turns into something alienating when coupled with misogyny or racism or transphobia. But in your head, this is the community you were waiting for. These podcast hosts, these senators, these presidents. We listen to you. We make room for you in places other subgroups simply shun you from. We understand your pain. Now, I'm not seeing many socks in this bag, and I'm beginning to get a little impatient here. In Michael Kimmel's book, Angry White Men, he recounts an episode of Rush Limbaugh's infamous radio show. A show which has, of course, landed Limbaugh the coveted position of having the most insane Wikipedia profile ever. I can only dream of the day the Shapiro podcast having a Wikipedia page, let alone a Wikipedia page that goes from early life and career to Barack Obama conspiracy theories. Rush was such a big talker, not so much when it came to the Viagra incident. In the episode Michael Kimmel references, Rush is on the phone with a man named Tom from Wichita, Kansas. Tom is an Army veteran who is out of work due to job cuts, and for the last few months, he's been unsuccessfully searching for a new job. Not only is this a dangerous situation for Tom to be in just as himself, but he's also a husband and a father. He needs a fruitful job to be able to support his family. He tells Rush, "We're into the red zone. We're cutting essentials, food, laundry, clothing, shoes. I'm scared to death." The only solution Tom can consider is to re-enlist in the Army, putting his kids at risk of losing their father, just as Tom lost his. Before he gets to that point, however, he genuinely wants to know what's being done to help people like him. People with families, people struggling with money, people who were promised prosperity but aren't receiving it. In his quest for answers, Tom chokes up. He says that his self-esteem is right now at its lowest that he's ever had it. All he wants is answers, genuine ones, from then-President Barack Obama. Rush, ever the provider, consoles Tom. "I know," he says, "I've been there, but I don't hear you as whining, Tom. I hear you as mad." Well, you might be thinking, mad? Mad at whom? Well, knowing Rush Limbaugh's historical coverage of Obama, which at one point swallowed every episode of his radio show in 2009, the obvious person to be upset at is the president. But why stop there? After all, since we're on the subject of Obama, he's actually making racial relations worse for white people ever since getting elected. Not only is he tanking the job industry, poisoning the water supply, and putting a plague upon our houses, he's putting the average white American, like you, Tom, in danger. He teaches young black kids to hate America, to hate white people, to hate everything our founding fathers imagined for this country. And yeah, the founding fathers would croak thrice over if they had a sour gummy worm wrapped in bacon, so they shouldn't be the judge of what we do in our new alpha age, but alright, back to manipulating Tom. What about Hispanic people, or Jewish people, or women? Why are they succeeding, but you're not? No, Tom, you're not whining when you consider how unfairly you're being treated compared to them. You're just angry. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Now, of course, Tom's line of questioning, specifically of President Obama's inaction, can be read as upset. No stoking needed. But to me, and certainly to Kimmel, Tom isn't showing signs of anger in these excerpts. If anything, he's scared, terrified even, of not being able to provide for his family, of leaving his kids fatherless just to make money, of a president who isn't meeting his expectations. Terrified that all of his hard work is going down the drain with nothing to stop it. But Limbaugh forgoes acknowledging this, instead settling on anger. And I think this is a very interesting alpha choice. Michael Kimmel describes this exchange as Limbaugh transforming Tom's experience. What starts as sadness, anxiety, grief, and worry is carefully manipulated into political rage. I hinted toward this transformation a lot in part 1, how people, regardless of political stance or ideology, feel afraid when it comes to feeling unheard. And for the most part, like I said then, these fears are valid, but it's how that fear transforms is the issue, how it's manipulated and refashioned into something much more purposeful for far-right agendas. Because while fear can be utilized for political gain, it can also be used for dismantling. Someone afraid of downward mobility can be manipulated into political rage, much like Rush manipulates Tom. But that person can also use that fear to question the institutions that make them downwardly mobile in the first place. Anger, on the other hand, is a hot and quick emotion. You're much less likely to question your surroundings the moment you're enraged. So, that person who is afraid of downward mobility and who might question the systems that make them downwardly mobile in the first place becomes less capable, or less obliged, to question those systems when you transform that fear into anger. You move the target off the institutions which you have a vested interest in protecting, and give them targets that guarantees no change will occur. You give them scapegoats. Now, this is my favorite part, because we here at the Shapiro podcast love stepping on the little guy. Derek Bell describes downwardly mobile white people as being placed in the middle of a giant well. Stay with me. At the bottom of the well, you have black people. Above both groups, you have the more powerful demographic, wealthy, oftentimes white or white-minded individuals. Instead of looking upward at the group standing on their shoulders, the disenfranchised white person looks down at the black faces they see at the bottom of the well.
I think black people are the faces at the bottom of the societal well that most of whites in America who are only one level above, also denied opportunity, also oppressed in a certain way, are fascinated in looking down on us rather than looking back at the top to see where the folk at the top are manipulating both groups.
They're almost enchanting, these faces, but they're also rage-inducing. As George Lipsitz probably would argue, the downwardly mobile white man would look at the people below him in the well, see that they're struggling in the muddy water, and think, they're making us all sink down faster. The disenfranchised white man would never look up at the powerful group standing on his shoulders, because that group tells him that it's the black faces at the bottom of the well that's keeping him in there. But get this, the powerful group is also in the well. That's the only way that they'll keep everyone below them. As Fannie Lou Hamer once said, the white man around here doesn't realize how good it would be to let us up out of the ditch. He can't keep us in the ditch without standing on us, and he can't get out of the ditch without letting us out. Scapegoats are integral to outrage politics because they're so easy to conjure. It reminds me of that scene in 1984 when Winston is participating in the 2 Minutes Hate, and he says, the horrible thing about it was not that one was obliged to act a part, but that it was impossible to avoid joining in. A hideous ecstasy of fear and vindictiveness, a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces in with a sledgehammer, seemed to flow through the whole group of people like an electric current, turning one even against one's will into a grimacing, screaming lunatic. And yet, the rage that one felt was an abstract, undirected emotion, which could be switched from one object to another, like the flame of a blow lamp. Political scapegoating works a lot like the 2 Minutes Hate. 1 minute we're blaming immigrant families for stealing jobs away from hardworking Americans. Next we're blaming Jewish people for the same thing, or black people, or sexy green M&Ms. The target is always moving because there is no real target. Because the anger that has been exploited out of fear is baseless, not necessarily fake, but baseless. It has to be constantly fed with fake targets to keep it going. As Kimmel states, scapegoating, whether of Jewish people, minorities, immigrants, women, whomever, directs the blame for your predicament away from the actual institutional sources of our problem and onto other groups who are less powerful. It grants them far more power, the power to take away from you that to which you are entitled, than they actually have. The other always looms large in the analysis of your own plight. Or, even more pertinent, Bell Hooks proclaims, cultures of domination rely on the cultivation of fear as a way to ensure obedience. Fear is the primary force upholding structures of domination. According to Kimmel, this transformation of fear into anger is a very popular tactic among outrage media, a concept coined by the sociologist Sarah Soberai and political scientist Jeffrey Berry. Outrage media essentially refers to any media source, whether that be television, blogs, radio, so on, that is designed to provoke a visceral response from the audience, usually in the form of anger, fear, or moral righteousness, through the use of overgeneralizations, sensationalism, misleading or patently inaccurate information, ad hominem attacks, and partial truth about opponents, like the tabloid newspaper or local newscast whose motto is, if it bleeds, it leads. The motto of outrage radio is closer to, if he yells, it sells. Anyone can participate in outrage politics in the media that disseminates it. Leftists, moderates, you, me, Uncle Billy over there in Michigan hosting his own far-right podcast through trucker radio servers. But specific to the right wing, outrage media is integral to their campaigns. From Fox News to political victory speeches to Fox News again having a meltdown over feminist M&Ms, and people on the left make big deals out of small issues. Language itself is also at the heart of outrage media. It's impossible to have a successful political campaign without being an expert at manipulating words. The war on woke, for instance, saw conservative leaders altering the meaning of the word woke to go from aware of social injustice to, well, they still don't know what it means. But they apply it in such a manner of attacks that their goal is made clear. Woke in the conservative co-opted definition usually means progressive politics. A further transformation of words can be found in other conservative talking points. Ben Shapiro consistently alters the meaning of the word equity in his book to mean individual injustice. Lying becomes not a false assertion, but anything that makes one uncomfortable. In the same vein, history is altered from actual past events into something cloudier, vaguer, more comfortable for people to digest. Even the audiences of far-right outrage media have begun altering the definitions of words, or at the very least, misunderstanding them. Words like love, community, compassion, and acceptance become marred when added to discourse surrounding radicalization. I believe this is detrimental to those who consume this sort of content because, 1, it further confirms their superiority biases, and 2, it seduces them away from justice, love, and true community.
I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks I give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
Ben Shapiro's book, If It Ain't Woke, Don't Fix It, starts off with a valiant condemnation of conservative lies. Lies that include the desperate attempts by a certain former president to retain power, lies that encouraged an armed rebellion to storm the Capitol of the United States, and lies that, under any other liberal, leftist-leaning, ludicrous, liberty-leeching lot, would have probably been covered more on Fox News. No spray? What is that? Objectionably true or something? Among these lies that Ben Shapiro owns, pawns, and destroys like some wop-rapping alpha are the so-called progressive lies of discriminatory systems. Things like systemic racism, microaggressions, even the fact that America's history is rooted in chattel slavery and Jim Crow laws do not exist to Ben. Actually, I'm not even making that up. He genuinely Okay, fine. Let me expand upon that. Ben considers equity another leftist, liberal, libelous lie. Whereas equality represents justice to Ben, equity represents injustice, infringements, and tribalism. In fact, he calls Ibram X. Kendi's racial equity theory idiotic and perverse, along with it being a cultish idea. In truth, equity is not some evil boogeyman coming to steal your rights away. Its very definition, according to Oxford Languages, means to be fair and impartial. When there are discriminatory systems in play, fairness looks different. One popular way of thinking about equity versus equality is this image of a trio at a baseball game. All of them are given the same opportunities, not keeping in mind that they all have different circumstances that impede upon their experience. The smallest attendee is unable to see over the fence, even when given the same box as his peers. Equity, on the other hand, takes into consideration certain impediments, working with advantages and disadvantages of each individual person. And when it comes to conversations about race, these disadvantages are not natural to any one group. Black people aren't disadvantaged because they're genetically predisposed to failure. That's a racist talking point. Instead, there are systems in place reaching back centuries that continue to ensure the structured disenfranchisement of Black people. This is where equity comes in to help. Because the bald guy is tall enough to see over the fence, he doesn't need a box. This can be a metaphor for having certain privileges. The second tallest person there does need some extra assistance to see over the fence, so they get one box. The smallest person would still be unable to see with just one box, so they get 2 boxes to account for their height. Everyone is taken into consideration, no one is left out, and everyone gets to enjoy the baseball game. This is somehow evil. A family enjoying the good old American pastime of baseball behind a fence. I also like that there's a liberation meme as well, where the fence is just completely gone. So when that ball comes at you curved, going 90 miles per hour, you'll find out if the healthcare system is any more equal than the baseball field. Ben Shapiro is not alone in transforming words or history. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida recently introduced the Stop Woke Act. His name is Ron with an N. I've been calling him Rob for like 2 videos straight. My bad. Woke in this legislation being an acronym that stands for Wrong to Our Kids and Employees. Where did the T come from, Rob? Stop with Toki. That one was worth it. The Stop Woke Act prohibits educators from teaching history in a way that makes any group, they mean white people, uncomfortable or guilty. It's largely a legislative effort to criminalize critical race theory, something Ben Shapiro valiantly debunks as being a part of American history. Critical race theory is a perverse worldview, he states, unsupportable by the evidence, in which all of America's key institutions are inextricably rooted in white supremacy. It is an activist campaign demanding the destruction of those institutions. Well, okay, that really depends on your idea of what unsupportable by the evidence means, because there is such a history of white supremacy in the United States that has aided in the continued investment in whiteness as an identity and a power since the onset of settler colonialism. Discriminatory housing practices led to disproportionate loan giving in the late 20th century, which meant that Black potential homeowners were turned down for loans and were relocated to isolated communities, while white homeowners were readily given loans and allowed to flourish in suburban neighborhoods. According to Danielle Solomon et al., this systematically undermined Black wealth in the United States, as home ownership and high-quality affordable rental housing are critical tools for wealth building and financial well-being in the nation.
Discrimination in housing is the major reason that Black families, up and down the income scale, have a tiny fraction of the family wealth that white families do, even white families with less education and lower incomes. For almost 30 years, 98% of FHA loans were handed out to white borrowers. Not only were Black neighborhoods redlined, and not only was the Fair Housing Act selectively enforced, if at all, but it is still, today, much harder for a Black person to get a mortgage or home loan than it is for a white person.
Environmental racism is another systemic issue in the United States, upheld by institutions that continue to discriminate against people of color. Corporations systematically target Native American reservations when looking for locations for hazardous waste incinerators, solid waste landfills, and nuclear waste storage. This direct targeting resulted in Navajo teenagers developing reproductive organ cancer at 17 times the national average because of their exposure to uranium mines. Even today, the CDC continues to find elevated levels of uranium in Navajo infants. What about the healthcare system? When people of color seek help for their intentionally caused illnesses, how are they aided? Well, Black Americans are less likely to live as long as white Americans due to systemic racism within the healthcare system. A 2015 study concluded that if African Americans had access to the nutrition, healthcare, and protection against environmental hazards offered routinely to whites, 2.7 million fewer of them would have died between 1970 and 2004. People of color as a whole are less likely to receive preventative medical care or costly remedial operations from Medicare than white people. And women of color are more likely to die in childbirth, or their infants are more likely to die, compared to white mothers and white infants. Even controlling for education, insurance, and income, Black and Indigenous mothers are still more likely to die in childbirth than white mothers. A lot of people try to explain away these various modes of discrimination by referencing natural outcome. They believe that there is something genetically or culturally different among people of color that lead them to more premature death, maternity deaths, or uranium poisoning, as if that's their fault. Ben Shapiro, in his book that I cited for this video, likes to mention how natural differences among all human beings can account for how systematically disadvantaged people of color are. He argues that we can't dismantle systems because that would alter naturally different outcomes. Indigenous people are not naturally exposed to uranium mines, and their reservations are not naturally located near hazardous waste incinerators. Black people are not naturally unable to endure birth, leading to their deaths. They're impacted by intersections of social discrimination, from healthcare coverage to being ignored by doctors when they explain their pain. Anyways, let me not get too upset here. Let me just read you this very pertinent passage from George Lipsitz. Because they are ignorant of even the recent history of the possessive investment in whiteness, white Americans produce largely cultural explanations for structural social problems. It fuels discourse that demonizes people of color for being victimized by these changes, while hiding the privileges of whiteness. It often attributes the economic advantages enjoyed by whites to their family values, faith, and foresight, rather than to the favoritism they enjoy through their possessive investment in whiteness. And just for clarification, George Lipsitz argues that anyone can be possessively invested in whiteness, even if they are not white, so I want you to just keep that in mind. So as long as we define social life as the sum total of conscious and deliberative individual activities, we will be able to discern as racist only individual manifestations of personal prejudice and hostility. Systemic, collective, and coordinated group behavior consequently drops out of sight. And all of that just covers 2 paragraphs of what George Lipsitz describes in his book, Possessive Investment in Whiteness. It says nothing of the carceral system, nothing of the policing system whose modern roots can be traced back to slave patrols, nothing of educational discrimination, or the intentional ravaging of minority communities done by government officials. Do you ever think Ronald Reagan is getting too hot down there? It's important, literally life and death important in some cases, to be able to see how discrimination impacts the systems we have built. These systems don't just appear unaffected by our biases. They were created by us and therefore reflect our society. These systems are not unmarred by history. In fact, they make up a grand portion of this country's history. That shouldn't be something to be guilty of course. If you're a descendant of a slave owner or a racist great-great-grandpappy, you can't control their actions, but you can control yours, here and now. Knowing our history should be something that makes you want to transform and refashion these systems so that they better take care of everyone, not just a select few. Time will not dismantle oppression. We do that. Martin Luther King Jr. himself, the unwhitewashed liberal threat to the United States version, not the conservative black friend version, once stated,
"It can be used either constructively or destructively. And I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme righteous in our nation, have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. And it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of the bad people and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation."
In a way, conservative pundits are disappearing history right before our very eyes. They are disappearing the fact that white supremacy is ingrained in the very fabric of the nation. They are disappearing the fact that discrimination of all kinds is embedded in even the most innocuous systems, from housing to healthcare. They're essentially calling for the erasure of any history that they feel makes the United States look bad. But it's history that happened, and trying to erase it from the collective mind of youth, or voters, or racist uncles will not absolve our contemporary age of the systemic issues plaguing it. George Orwell in 1984 coined the term doublethink, to know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously 2 opinions which canceled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in them both, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly forget it again. And this is something that conservatives are currently excelling at. Their crusade against so-called progressive lies and their fervent erasure of history is done to maintain the very things they wish to remain unnamed. They don't want white privilege or white supremacy to be taught about because it's something that must remain invisible to work. As Richard Dyer suggests, white power secures its dominance by seeming not to be anything in particular. George Lipsitz calls it the unmarked category against which difference is constructed, and never has to speak its name, never has to acknowledge its role as an organizing principle in social and cultural relations. To name it, to educate others on it, threatens the conservative status quo. It damages all of the hard work they've done to provide more visible targets for their audience to scapegoat. Conservatives are afraid of these systems being dismantled because they're afraid of losing their footing at the top of the well. George Lipsitz speaks of this fear, stating, "Whiteness is perpetually defensive and insecure, forever feeling besieged and forever fearful of being betrayed. Protecting yet hiding the workings of whiteness entails a cultural imagination characterized by a seemingly endless chain of evasions, erasures, omissions, occlusions, deflections, and diversions." In fact, conservative media seeks to melt your brain by having you believe the evasions and erasures funneled to you through the screen. Conservatives seek to acknowledge evil, lie about its existence, and continue to live with it, as George Lipsitz describes. And they want you to join them. As Michael Kimmel explains, outrage media is not a one-way street. The audience is an active participant. Together with the host, they produce the rage of the day and direct it toward the issues on which the free-floating rage will land. They need their viewers to be a part of their lying act because that is how it's sustained. James Baldwin describes it as liars traveling in a pack in order to be reassured that the judgment day will never come for them. They need each other for the well-being, the health, the perpetuation of their lie. They have a tacit agreement to guard each other's secrets, for they have the same secret. Lying and learning to live with evil essentially means to lie about the history of American racism, of white supremacy, and of continuing discriminatory systems in order to maintain them. And this concept is surprisingly congruent with conservative values. They would rather experience this discrimination rather than challenge it. As Bacevich argues, conservatives uphold the principle of social continuity. They prefer the devil they know to the devil they don't know. Even Ben Shapiro asserts that there will always exist some form of inequality and discrimination within society, that the promise of utopia is an empty one. And in that vein, conservatives feel justified in denying change. Evil becomes something inherent or necessary to the world, rather than something that must be rooted out. In that same way, power, domination, oppression, and lovelessness become ingrained in American tradition. Our conception of what it means to love, to care for something, gets disfigured by how we treat our nation, the one that we claim to deeply respect. How can we when we omit her history, when we deny her people of equity? As W.E.B. Du Bois wrote nearly a century ago, nations reel and stagger on their way. They make hideous mistakes. They commit frightful wrongs. They do great and beautiful things. And shall we not best guide humanity by telling the truth about all this, so far as the truth is ascertainable?
Now, I would be the first one to say that there is real need for a lot of heart changing in our country. And I believe in changing the heart. I preach about it. I believe in the need for conversion in many instances and regeneration, to use theological terms.
So while I was doing research for this podcast episode, I had to watch a lot of Fox News. Like, just enough to where I wanted to rip my scalp back and scrub my brain, but not too much where I would register Republican and marry my cousin. And all of this conservative media made me start to wonder, how do conservatives define the keywords they use in their anti-woke rants? And I don't just mean words like woke or progressive or even equity. I mean words that have roots even outside of politics. Words we all use and understand even if we aren't interested in what's going on under Donald Trump's toupee. Mid-December, I made a notes app entry with a list of questions for conservatives, and it's as follows. What is your definition of love? What is your definition of truth, history, protection, progress? Do you define them based on control, power? And if you do, why is that? Since words are powerful tools when it comes to politics and community building, it's not necessarily hard to understand why and how conservatives manipulate them for an agenda. Turning woke into something that means danger when it originally meant to be aware of social injustice convinces their audience to be further afraid of progress. It convinces them that being aware is a bad thing. And that makes it easy for conservatives to sustain discriminatory systems. But what about words like love or community? How does misunderstanding those two universal words aid in sustained hierarchies and domination? I recently reread Bell Hooks's All About Love in a quest to understand our growing lovelessness and misunderstanding of community and discourse surrounding de-radicalization. I think it's a thought-provoking book, brilliant, but overall, this book is revolutionary in its dealings with love and community. And it's one of the reasons I believe we are getting those two words so wrong in political conversation. Hooks gives love a working definition using the help of Erich Fromm: the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love is the act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Love is not something that is forced. We don't have to love anyone, and that can be perfectly exemplified in political discourse. But in the sense of love being an action, that is, something that we actively do, we definitely choose to love others and ourselves. Love is, according to Hooks, a combination of trust, commitment, care, respect, knowledge, and responsibility. So how does this clash with how we see love in political discourse? When conservatives say that they love their children, so they're protecting them from the evil of indoctrination, of education, and gay people, are they really acting in a sense that embodies Hooks' view of love? When political pundits say they love this country, but refuse to acknowledge its history, when they use fear and anger to keep themselves in positions of power, are they acting in a way that embodies Hooks' vision? There are many stipulations when it comes to defining love. Among the earlier characteristics, love cannot exist alongside fear, control, power, or domination. In fact, Carl Jung once said, "Where the will to power is paramount, love will be lacking." And for all my Bible lovers out there, the first epistle of John states that there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. And Hooks herself states, domination cannot exist in any social situation where a love ethic prevails. And yet these are the characteristics at the heart of the conservative movement. Fear, anger, a quest for power and domination. How can we suggest that conservatives love their audience when they're more committed to dominating them than caring for them? Ideally, we the people would reject this model of so-called love that is coupled with power and domination at our expense. We wouldn't vote for Donald Trump in such overwhelming numbers. We wouldn't tune into Kevin Samuels or Joe Rogan or that leftist liberal loser Shakespeare. As Bell Hooks suggests, we have power as consumers. We can exercise that power all the time by not choosing to invest time, energy, or funds to support the production and dissemination of mass media images that do not reflect life-enhancing values that undermine a love ethic. And in this ideal world, we would better understand how communities work. We wouldn't look at exploitation and manipulation as a sign of healthy and sustaining love. Much of the discourse surrounding whether or not leftists are equipped to de-radicalize young white men from far-right pipelines hinges on the idea that conservatives are a compassionate community for these boys. And it's not hard to see why people think like that. A lot of personalities at the center of the conservative movement are experts at being personable, at sounding compassionate, at seducing their viewers away from true love and community. They make their audiences feel self-righteous, justified in their biases. They don't ask for much change or challenge. They just want you to show up and they'll handle the rest. But this is not a healthy community. Utilizing the help of Scott M. Peck, Hook defines community as the coming together of a group of individuals who have learned how to communicate honestly with each other, whose relationships go deeper than their masks of composure. Healthy communities don't lie to each other. They don't travel in packs to sustain their health of their lies. They don't omit, erase, or give false targets to uphold dominating systems. People I've read tweets from on Twitter are under the impression that the left loses because they acknowledge systems of power in a way that potential pipeline travelers view as self-degrading or guilt-inducing. So they go to far-right corners where their biases and feelings are accepted without challenge. That doesn't mean that the far right is better at living in community with their audience. That simply means that there are some people committed to upholding or protecting their own power, and they don't want to be in community with people who threaten that. Now, I obviously think there's a difference between doing something wrong, getting something wrong, naturally as all humans do, and dedicating yourself to the upholding of systems of power that discriminate. Hooks asserts that we have to choose love, that in order to accept love in the first place, we have to consciously decide to change. We cannot be forced or seduced or analyzed out of hate. We have to take the initiative to embrace transformation through love ourselves. Of course, that doesn't mean activism should cease until everyone is ready, because then it'll never happen. Both have to work in tandem. As MLK Jr. said, time is not an ally to social change if not accompanied by social effort. So even as people continue to misunderstand progress, even when they continue to dedicate themselves to acting a fool in my Hell for Review comment section, I'm not going to stop trying to educate. But that also means that the people in that comment section have to take responsibility for themselves. Now, I understand that in many ways, Challenging your own biases and accepting others in a quest for a better life for not only them, but for yourself, is a hard decision to make when you have to give up your illusion of power in the process, when you have to dedicate yourself to dismantling the possessive investment of whiteness or patriarchy or heteronormativity. Hooks notes that many of us choose relationships that will never become loving because we feel safer. The demands are not as intense as loving requires. The risk is not as great. So we'd rather sit in hell with our aggrieved entitlement, manipulated and used by a group uncommitted to love and community, than to help others break down the systems of power that make life unbearable for everyone else. We'd rather be lied to, become liars ourselves, and learn how to live with evil than be told the truth about our biases. But again, as Hooks suggests, in a healthy community, we are able to hear honest, critical feedback. We trust that a true friend desires our good. When we are committed to doing the work of love, we listen, even when it hurts. I want to add some brief nuance to the conversation of left versus right. A lot of people think that because left-leaning communities, quote-unquote, expect so much from each other, that means it's a hostile territory for people wanting to join from neutral or even right-leaning communities. One of the issues I have with sort of left-leaning online activism is that there is a pervasive sense of, you should already know this, and if you don't know it, you're a horrible person, which in a lot of ways can be somewhat argued. There's a lot of information online about a lot of different aspects of social justice, and if you truly want to know the basics of something, it's best to read up on that or watch a video or what have you. But sometimes people genuinely just make mistakes. They don't understand something, or they say the wrong thing, and are subsequently dragged or dogpiled, which isn't conducive to learning or even love. And I'm not trying to police how other people voice their hurt. We all have our different methods and concepts of justice. And I will say that our current model of dogpiling online is so normalized and so ingrained in our culture that I understand how rejecting it is really hard to do. But I will say that it seems like a lot of people are more interested in conflict than resolution and have a hard time discerning whether someone is open to learning and has made a mistake, or if they're actually bigoted and are committed to being a bigot until they die. But even with that in mind, I don't personally see the appeal of becoming apolitical or right-wing just because some people on the left yelled at me. I think that has more to do with ego than genuine compassion. I've had my fair share of getting things wrong, and while there have been some very patient, loving, and respectful people who corrected me and held space for me to change my mind or learn, there have also been people who have approached me rather vitriolic, and I think that's kind of just how it works. That's not me trying to police. I understand, coming from a minority community, how exhausting it is that everyone isn't with the program by now. But as I age and as I grow, I realize just how little I know even about issues within my own community. And yet, even knowing that there's a possibility that people will dogpile me in a quest for so-called justice, I would still never turn my back on advocating for others, because I think my belief in equality for everyone stems not from ego, but from genuine belief and compassion for others. So I think as we commit to what Martin Luther King Jr. described as heart-changing, that is, letting love guide our actions and beliefs, we also have to commit to destroying our ego, our pride, and our infatuation with conflict. Another popular talking point when it comes to painting conservative communities as more compassionate and seductive to young white men is that they allegedly accept their audiences for who they are. This is seen as a good thing, because in the conservative sense, loving something means keeping it the same. But true love and community, at least in Hooks' vision, is dedicated to growth, not stagnation. Most of the time we think that love means just accepting the other person as who they are. Who among us has not learned the hard way that we cannot change someone, mold them, and make them into the ideal beloved we might want them to be? Yet when we commit to true love, we are committed to being changed, to being acted upon by the beloved in a way that enables us to be more fully self-actualized. This commitment to change is chosen. It happens by mutual agreement. True love is unconditional, but to truly flourish, it requires an ongoing commitment to constructive struggle and change. Change, transformation, progress, these are integral to love and community. The way in which conservatives use fear, manipulation, and at times violence to uphold systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, and cis heteronormativity does not exist alongside love. Love is significant not only to our personal dealings, but to politics as a whole. We must sacrifice our power, we must commit to change, and we must understand that we cannot simultaneously be manipulated and cared for. They don't care about us, and they certainly don't care about you, but we can care about each other. Love is profoundly political. Our deepest revolution will come when we understand this truth. Only love can give us the strength to go forward in the midst of heartbreak and misery. Only love can give us the power to reconcile, to redeem, the power to renew weary spirits and save lost souls. The transformative power of love is the foundation of all meaningful social change. Without love, our lives are without meaning. Love is the heart of the matter. When all else has fallen away, love sustains. We're fine. This is so humiliating. Okay. I feel like I'm not Kyle enough right now, you know? I feel like I could talk more Kyle. I feel like I'm just talking like myself. It's okay. I didn't know what the noise was. How do I sit more alpha? I was just like doing that. No, I was just doing that for the video. I'm not actually upset or anything. Like, I'm not supposed to enjoy getting sprayed. Yeah, that would be an issue. You want to stretch? You can please get up. I don't want people to think I'm like a bad boss. Where is the end of this section at? Oh my god. When we lie. Why are you leaving? When we lie and oppress and step on the very... Okay, sorry. I'm not laughing at this, guys. I'm laughing at... When we lie and oppress and step on the very values she claims to hold. Are you shaking?
I'm trying to find more right now. I'm gonna follow along.
Andrew, you're shaking.
What? No, I was looking.
Your back was trembling. In a country accent.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.